started a lot earlier than that. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to talk about kind of the present, how we got where we are now, and then hopefully we can kind of break out a little bit, interact with one another a little bit, and talk about some things that we can do to prevent this from happening in the future, because that's obviously why we're all here. We don't want to see this keep happening. And I think, setting the bar really low at, we would like to not be dead on screen is good. But I think we can even maybe try to set the bar higher than that. Think about some goals, think about some ways that we as fans can reach out, because obviously we as fans are why this is all happening now, why this is in the public eye. And we want to figure out how to keep it there and how to make some progress. And so that's why I want to do this talk today. And so, like I said, this is kind of a little bit of what I'm going to talk about today, a very brief outline. I kind of already gave that to you. So we'll move on from here. And what is a trope? Does anybody want to throw out what you think a trope? What do you think a trope might be? Like if you had to give a concise definition of a trope. Anybody just throw out some words?
Like a generalized in a narrative.
Something generalized in a narrative. What else?
Cliche.
A cliched narrative, yes. Anybody else? Cliche is good. That's good.
Perhaps bias.
Bias, perhaps, yes.
Shortcut.
A shortcut, yes. Anything else? Anybody?
Lazy.
Okay, those are all good. Those are all good. Interestingly enough, we often think of tropes as something negative. They're not always. In the panel I was in yesterday, I talked briefly about a trope that we kind of like sometimes. Is this on or not?
Yeah, we're gonna.
Okay. Because I felt like I was yelling.
Yeah.
Is this better? Is this better? No, it's not. Yes, it is. No. Everybody's saying no. Some people are saying yes. I'm really confused right now.
Incredible issues with the
Okay.
with the.
How about this one?
No, same one.
No.
Same thing.
That's a little better.
Okay, I'm gonna keep talking. And no. Holy crap.
The last couple of
Yeah, I would talk without the mic.
Okay, should I just talk like this? Is that
Yeah.
All right.
All right, thank you. We're getting wired tomorrow.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Technological fail number 2. That's okay though. I'm used to doing this. Strangely enough. So anyway, tropes. There are tropes we like. I talked about the meet cute yesterday in the panel about when the couple in the romantic comedy, how they have to meet up by bumping into each other at the grocery store, something goofy like that. We have to have it. That's a trope. Are there any other ones we like? Anybody have any tropes they like? Happy endings. Yes.
Friends to lovers.
Friends to lovers. Yeah, we can talk about fan fiction tropes as well, because that's what it is. Yes. Any other ones?
Enemies to friends to lovers.
Enemies to friends to lovers. Okay, yes. Any other ones?
Pride and Prejudice.
Yes. Just a whole trope. Okay? Anything else? Underdog story. That's a good one. So we have a lot of these that we like. It's not that they're all terrible. And even the ones that are quote-unquote cliche, sometimes authors can make them their own. So it's not that they're all bad. However, we know that also they can be used without care and turn into something very bad, as we have seen, as is the reason that we're all here. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there so we kind of get to thinking about that. And then I want to talk a little bit also about queer history. Because a lot of the history of queerness is also a history of words. And that's something that we don't think about that much. What we call ourselves, what people call us. That is kind of a big part of the history of queerness. And so I actually teach a course sometimes called The Invention of Sexuality. And I don't mean that sexuality was actually invented, but I mean the invention of the terminology that we use to talk about sexuality. And so the term homosexual, for example, does anybody know when that term came into usage? Anybody? 1940 something? There's a guess. Anybody else? 1880-ish. Okay. Anybody else? 14th century. Okay. I mean, homosexuality definitely existed in the 14th century. Definitely say that. Actually,
with the Greeks, since it's almost the same.
that is a Greek word part. Interestingly enough, the two parts that form that word, one part is Greek, one part is Latin. It's a neologism. And so it actually came from this guy right here, Karl Maria Hartbeny. He's Austro-Hungarian, and I probably just slaughtered his last name because I don't know Hungarian. But he was a writer and activist, and he actually coined both the terms homosexual and heterosexual, meaning that straightness has only existed since 1868, if you can believe that. So, and I do. So, so he actually came, it was around the time of Imperial Germany, when the law code for Imperial Germany had this paragraph 175, which you might have heard of before. It was a really famous sodomy law. And it actually lasted up through the 1960s in different forms of German law through the different regimes that were there. It's very similar to a lot of laws that existed in the US, England, Australia, a bunch of other European countries. So it was a pretty common type of law, all 50 states in the US. In fact, the last ones were repealed in the US in 2003. And so it led to extortion, blackmailing, arrests, rampant suicide. I think we're familiar with that topic, unfortunately. And so, this is not new, but it's not as old as you might think. And then there were a lot of competing terms for different kinds of sexual behaviors that became a topic of study. It was really popular in the late 1800s. I think we're all familiar with Freud. Well, there were a lot of other people at that time also studying sexual behaviors. And so there was a renewed interest in enforcing these sodomy laws kind of alongside this identifying of sexual categories and sexual behaviors. And so the idea of the homosexual as a person, as an orientation, if you will, as a category came about, as opposed to a person participating in discrete behaviors. And that's a fine distinction, but I think it's one that, now we think of the idea of sexual orientation. That only came about in the late 1800s. And so this is, of course, a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, homosexuality, bisexuality, all these categories that we think about now that are pretty common for us to consider and use for self-identification, identification of other people, that's good, being able to identify oneself, but on the other hand, it also gives other people a way to form social stigmas. And so, and there was certainly a double-edged sword at that time, because it gave other people a way to kind of categorize folks into these negative stereotypes, negative social stigmas, and it created this public discourse that I'll talk about in a second. And it also led to the blackmail of mainly gay men, which I'll address in a second, why it was mainly gay men. And so this is, like I said, it's mainly gay men. So any idea of why we're talking about mainly men here in this period and not women? And that these sodomy laws really particularly addressed male homosexual behavior? Yes?
Because in a patriarchal society, sex without the penis is not considered sex.
Yes. Yes, precisely. Anything anybody wants to add to that? Yes.
Women weren't really seen as having sexuality.
Right, kind of just a blank. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, if women don't own property or have money, it's hard to blackmail them.
Very true. So there's an economic aspect to that as well. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because during the 19th century, rare was a woman who was working invisible, so that her gender nonconformity and or sexual relations could be made visible and thereby questionable.
Bam. Yes. So which relates to the patriarchy comment that we got right at the beginning. So I think all these comments together really sums that up nicely. And so what we're talking about mainly here right now is the treatment of gay men, and I'll get more into women as we get further into the 20th century. But that sums it up nicely, so I appreciate all your contributions there. And I want to also talk about, obviously, because I'm mainly addressing gay men at this point, but I also want to obviously address the fact that we have a bunch of different categories that we talk about now. This nuanced understanding that we have now was definitely not the case at the time. There were different people working in areas that would lead to that nuance, certainly. But one of the more interesting ones that I like to read about from that time is this guy Karl Ulrichs in the 1860s, And he kind of thought of everybody who was not straight kind of as this one whole other gender that he called the third sex, that had kind of different types of behavior, but that they were all kind of this third sex. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Obviously, that doesn't fit with our model now, but there were so many different people that kind of described these different models, and they were competing, and how we settled on the ones that we talk about now as kind of predominant ones. It was sort of like the beta versus VHS of the late 19th century. That only about 3 people in the audience. So the latter 1800s was a really interesting time in terms of this explosion of talking about sex, even though we think of that time as fairly buttoned down and not sexy at all. And if you've ever read Michel Foucault, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so queer history, late 1800s. That also, obviously, the very late 1800s coincides with the emergence of film. And what you have here is a still from one of the very first films that was ever made. It's 1895. There isn't really much left from it now, but this is a still, and what you see there are 2 men dancing. And there's actually, at one point in the film, also 2 men kissing. I couldn't find a still of that, unfortunately. But the early history of film was pretty wild. And there were all kinds of examples of films showing cross-dressing, profanity. Well, there wasn't sound, so people mouthed it, but you know what I mean. And then nakedness and all kinds of things you would not associate with film at that time, because there really wasn't yet a mechanism of censorship in place. And so by the 1920s, Hollywood was under a lot of pressure from organized religion, particularly, and the government was starting to kind of loom large in that, to clean up the entertainment industry, and that includes, of course, books, that includes comic books, that includes anything of a mass entertainment nature. And so film certainly fell under that. And, and we think about any time a new technology emerges, there's always this criticism, well, this is going to corrupt everyone. Every time something emerges, that, virtual reality, guaranteed, there are people right now clamoring about what that's going to do. And so, this is not a new argument. Not a new argument. It's been happening ever since there have been new entertainment technologies emerging. And so that brings us to 1930, which Hollywood adopts its own code. This was self-censorship. It was not anything imposed, but it was in order to keep it from being imposed by the government based on these a lot of religious lobbies. And so the Hays Code is a 5-page document. It's not very long, and it was meant to govern what could and could not be shown in films. It lasted from about 1930 to the late 1960s when it was abolished to make way for the Motion Picture Academy, or the Motion Picture Association of America, which governs the PG-13R, NC-17 rating system that we have now. And so this gave way to that eventually. But the Hays Code, its reference to homosexuality is actually rather vague. What it says is sex perverted. This is the list of do not show, things that cannot be shown. So it's presented as a list of things that are not okay, things that are forbidden. And one of those things is sex perversion or any inference of it is forbidden. And so that sounds pretty vague to our ears. But what sex perversion meant at that time was homosexuality. That's what it meant. That's what they were referring to. It could mean sort of other paraphilias, but what it meant was homosexuality. That's what it meant to be called a pervert at that time. And so it just was not allowed to be mentioned, shown in any way. It could be referred to a little bit euphemistically through stereotypes, which I'll also get to in a moment. But in the 1960s, eventually, so 30 some odd years later, so it didn't even actually last that long, the code was altered to permit the prudent treatment of homosexuality, and I'll also get to what that means in a minute. And then the TV code, which was somewhat based on the Hays Code, was adopted in the 1950s, and because TV really didn't come into play that much until the 1950s. And so it took on kind of similarly vague terminology talking about homosexuality when it said sex crimes and abnormalities. And of course, we have to remember that homosexuality was a sex crime at this time in all 50 states. And so, again, these things were considered not acceptable. And so this is basically censorship. It was meant to not corrupt the public, as it were. And so what that meant was, of course, anybody in the audience who was queer was not going to see anything of that nature in any kind of mass entertainment. Like I said, the sodomy laws were still in effect in all 50 states in the U.S. at that time. And again, these words, these vague words, were, to anybody reading them at that time period, absolutely referred to homosexuality. And also, this sex perversion was a phrase that was often associated with the criminal charge of sodomy. That was kind of the common vernacular for it. And so, the Hays Code began to relax, kind of on a case-by-case basis, starting in the 1950s, but into the 1960s, and then eventually dissolved in the 1960s. So, gays, particularly gay men, but also, and so particularly gay men, but also to an extent, also women started to come into play as well. They were portrayed through stereotypes. And so I have listed some of the stereotypes here: the pansy, the tomboy, the dour spinster, the spinster aunt, whatever, the school marm, etc. So we have these stereotypes of that we know of now as kind of these queer characters. And they were meant to sort of suggest that, but not overtly stated. So it was kind of subtext at the time. And they could be played for comedy or kind of a little bit of tragedy, but it was never overtly stated. And then, as in the late 1800s, and this is, and by the way, I'm in the process of publishing an article on queer baiting, and so this is kind of my thesis of the article. And basically what I'm saying is this: in the 1800s, when this discourse about sexuality and homosexuality came to be a part of the popular discourse in kind of general society, was when this backlash happened of all these arrests and the blackmailing and all that kind of stuff. And what I'm saying is, when it became something that could be shown on screen overtly, that's when the BYG came in. That's when barrier gaze started happening. That's when there was a backlash you saw on screen. Because when you have these sort of just vague stereotypes that suggest homosexuality, it's funny. But when they started overtly showing queer characters as queer characters, suddenly they start being punished for it. And so that's what I'll get to here. And that's when we get into the actual practice of BYG on screen. So, queer baiting, so like I said, there's this parallel, and so what that translates to is we get no happy endings, and we get characters who are either sinister, these sinister kind of evil queer characters. I think Vincent Price is actually a really good example of kind of the sinister queer. But again, he's sort of subtext. But queer baiting, basically, it parallels this trapping, this punishment mechanism of the old legal codes, where they would kind of bring in gay men and trap them and extort them or blackmail them or punish them to the extent of the law. And then on screen, we get pulled in, we get trapped, we get baited into wanting to watch these great stories and these characters that we hope are going to come about, and then bam, they either get eliminated or they get killed or whatever it is. And so I feel like there's a real parallel here. Obviously, it's not happening on purpose necessarily, but culture works in mysterious ways. These patterns happen. They happen over time. They don't happen purposely. Nobody planned to make this happen over decades and decades and decades with thousands and thousands of productions, but that's in effect what has happened. And so that's kind of my thesis of this article that I wrote. So anyway, these tropes that we're talking about here, with the barrier gaze, for example, this mirrors a centuries-old pattern. And that's kind of what I want to get at with that. And I'm going to give you a few examples here. Has anybody heard of the Children's Hour? It's a pretty famous early depiction of lesbians on film. And so I mean, this is an A-list movie. This is a big film. I mean, these are big names. These are names we still know. You know, Audrey Hepburn, Shirley MacLaine, James Garner. I mean, these are well-known names. And so yeah, we have the you know, the typical pattern here. And I give a little summary here. You can look at it yourself. But I think significantly, she hangs herself in a closet. Like, yikes. So anyway, and we have this pattern of the lesbian and then the lady who ends up with a man. And we see that over and over again in a lot of stories. Here's a little bit lesser known one called The Fox, and I forgot to put the year, sorry, it's 1967. And so again, we have this one character professing her love for the other character, and the other character eventually ends up with a man. But the lady who professes her love ends up being killed by a falling tree, which falls between her legs. Guys, what the hell? Like, really? I mean, could we add insult to injury any more than that? We have a bunch of examples of more recent movies. I've named a few here. These were just off the top of my head. Anybody have any others? You want to add to this list? Anybody? Yes, yes. Oh, I forgot about that one. Yeah, any others? No more dead lesbian movies than this, really? I mean, I know there are more, but these are just the ones I named. Yeah, did I not put high art on there? Okay. Anyway, there are more. I know there are more. These are just the ones I named off the top of my head. Oh, yeah, right, yeah. Okay, I'm hearing a few percolating. I mean, anyway, this is film, and I know we're talking about TV here, and so we already have that list, thanks to the lovely Heather Hogan, who's probably at the shoot thing. I don't think
She's laying down.
Oh, she is, okay, good for her. Yeah, as she should be. And so we don't have to make that list, because that list has been made. There are 177 examples on it as we speak. There might be more, who knows. But anyway, so this is what it's come to. This is where we are. But what I really would like to talk about is the fact that 2016, okay, although there were some real lows, there were some really low lows. I felt them, you felt them, they were there. But did anybody notice, by the way, what my bullet points are?
Yes.
I'm really proud of that. I'm super proud of that. I just want to mention that. And so, anyway, but what I want to emphasize, and I talked about this briefly in the panel that I was on yesterday, is that what happened this year with the fan response to what happened with episode 307 of The 100 is unprecedented. I've been following media culture both personally for fun reasons, but also intellectually as a scholar for quite some time, at least 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Never seen anything like this. I've never seen a fan response like this. I've never seen it coordinated to the degree that it was coordinated like this. And Heather actually made a really great point yesterday, saying that although maybe intuitively we didn't fully realize this, but what we were doing was we were patterning a lot of our media response after a lot of the tactics that were used by Black Lives Matter. And after she pointed that out, it really made sense. It really made sense to me because kind of the way that they've utilized social media in a lot of their movement really kind of was instinctively a lot of the things that we did in ours. And so that really makes a lot of sense. And I think we ought to give props for that because that's, a great way to organize something online. And so, the fact that it was so immediate and it was so coordinated and it was so intense and that we actually got a response, that we actually got some attention, some legitimate attention, that got some real mainstream media actually looking our way and pointing out, oh, this is strange. What is with this lesbian death problem or all these lesbian and bisexual women getting killed on all these major TV shows? What is that? And this was happening for several months, and then when the GLAAD report came out, and GLAAD does not actually usually spend that much time talking about queer women. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but it's actually, they don't spend that much time paying that much attention to us. Sorry, but they kind of don't. And so the fact that they really emphasized that and pointed it out and featured a picture of Lexa in the GLAAD report was kind of amazing. And then the fact that, and I think somebody already pointed this out, probably several people actually, but the UN retweeted the Washington Post article about it. I mean, this is unprecedented. I think that, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that this fan response was so intense and so uncoordinated. Nothing like this has ever happened. Nothing like this has ever happened. And I think you should all be proud of yourselves for being a part of it, because it's amazing. And I think I'm really proud of all of you guys. But then again, I'm not surprised, because it was that big of a deal, you know, and it was time for it to stop. And I think I've heard several people mention, you know, no showrunner again is going to ever be able to you know, look back on this year and go, oh well, I guess maybe nobody will notice. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so, so I just want to kind of look back a little bit for a few minutes and think, what are some of the ways that we made our voices heard through all this? Like, I wrote on my personal blog, and somehow that like blew up in a strange way that I could have never imagined. But what are some other things that folks did? Yeah.
Twitter trends.
Yeah, the Twitter trends. What was that? Like 2 weeks or something, nonstop, every day? That got some attention. Yeah? Writing the advertising sponsors. Yeah, they're sponsors, advertising sponsors, yeah. They're writing the sponsors and getting some feedback from them saying, oh yeah, we didn't know that, thank you for, and like some of them actually removed their ads, yeah.
An intentional blackout of watching shows.
Yes, which is still happening.
That's the whole point, is that the intent behind querying is to get ratings, the cheap ratings, the ratings that they're not going to fall through. So, realizing that, then we don't give them the ratings, then they're not going to get any more shows. And we have the power to do that as the viewers, because they're making money off of us.
Well, and see, that's the thing, is that queer viewers are dedicated viewers. If we love a show, we will watch that show for 5 seasons just to see 2 people kiss. I mean, who in this room has not done that? Really? Okay, maybe one person. No, okay, but one holdout over there. But no, I mean, we are dedicated viewers, and not only, like, when we love a show and we see it being progressive on LGBTQ issues, we will tell people about it. We will absolutely tell people about it, and we will not shut up until they watch that show. I mean, yeah, and so, you know, people who make shows want us for that, yeah? Yes?
I was going to say, just with talking about the backlash on Lex's death and how unprecedented it was. I mean, definitely just the timing following Black Lives Matter and social media, where social media was at the time, were a huge part of the factor. As hard as we could just argue, it was a straw that broke the camel's back in terms of all the other ones that just that. I mean, what you're talking about now in terms of the cheap ratings and our dedication, I think what is just a huge factor undeniably is the direct courting of the fan base by the showrunner and by the creative team, and just not engaging directly in that way, but not understanding it's a two-way street.
Exactly, and I think that's part of why we felt so hurt in this particular instance, because I mean, there have been myriad other cases of lesbian or bisexual women characters or any kind of LGBTQ characters being killed where this could have happened. But I think in this one, this one put it over the edge for that particular reason, because we were so courted and made to feel so comfortable, specifically by the people involved in making the show. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, yes.
I think just going off that, also the obvious double standard that I felt, that she was a leader, the way she was just kind of killed, and then that was the end of it.
Yeah.
I know that I live in a world where I'm a sexual minority and I'm not treated the same, but to watch that play out in front of me, and I felt like the way the show addressed it was so apathetic towards that I did feel a sense of betrayal, that I had invested some time into this character, and she was just killed, where a male character would not have, I think, been thrown away like that.
Well, and to watch that when the lead couple, when it looked like the lead couple in the show was going to be a same-sex couple.
Right.
Because that's never happened before. Like
Unless
where,
you count Cena.
what's that?
Unless you count Cena.
Okay, fair point. Fair, but I mean,
What?
unless you count Cena, but,
Oh, Xena.
but I don't, yeah, that's a whole other discussion. So,
We're not talking about subtext.
yeah,
We're
no,
talking about
yes,
actual
exactly. It's a whole other discussion. So, but I mean, the point being, like, this was all set up to be like, this is when it's going to happen for us. Like, this is when we get the lead relationship treatment on a show, on a mainstream show, on an over-the-air network TV show during prime time. You know, that's never happened as far as I know. And so, you know, we were set up for that. But I don't want to get off into the negative stuff because I think we've all rehearsed that already, and it's sad and it's terrible, and I felt like shit for a long time, and I think we all did. But what I really want to talk about is the fact that we made this stuff known. We put this information out there where everybody had to hear it. And there's a hand back here that's been up for a little bit.
The trope project was really focused it, and also it made it something that the actors themselves had to digest, and it made it real, I think, for them to understand the significance of the characters. And I think that was really a significant way that our voices were heard as well.
I think that's absolutely the case, and I think that also added a lot of legitimacy to what we were doing. And I think that's really important. Yeah. Yes.
Like mainstream and mainstream media and newspapers, I felt like every lesbian would ever like know a journalist like second cousin Lulu reached out and that person to write an article for Germany, and I read an article about Lexa's death like half a year later in the Taz, which is like a big representative newspaper in Berlin, like reaching millions of people, like in Berlin years later about this, and she hadn't even died on her TV at the time. You know,
Y'all already know about everything that happens before it happens anyway.
Ever knew somebody who wrote for something, who had some kind of media outlet, took that step and reached out, and I felt that we as a community kind of managed to reach out into spaces that we are usually not seen or heard, or had allies that we actually used for that one time.
Absolutely. Yes.
I also think it was really interesting. I don't know how many people know about this, but when they sent out, WB sent out the DVDs to the fans, they asked them to fill out a survey. And one of the survey questions was, it literally said, I know this is a spoiler, but how much did Lexa's death affect your buying purchase of this DVD? And they actually put that in the survey from the, you didn't know that? No, actually, that was an official WB survey question that was sent with the DVD.
Holy crap.
So they were that interested in that backlash and wanting to know how it
That's
affected
fascinating.
buying.
Huh. Well, so anyway, we made this happen. I mean, we as viewers, we as fans, kept this in the public eye. And we, to some extent, got it into the public eye, and then we kept it in the public eye. And for quite some time, throughout almost the entirety of 2016, and it keeps coming up in one way or another. And so they're not going to be able to forget it now. And I think that's really fantastic. And so my question here, and we've got officially 5 more minutes left, but I'm going to say unofficially 10 more minutes based on the fact that we had to start late. And so in these last few minutes, I would like to give you guys about maybe 3 to 5 minutes to just talk with your neighbors, get to know some new friends around you. And what I'd like to talk about is maybe what we can do to continue this. And I would say these are just my goals. You may have other goals, but some goals that I think we could maybe look forward to are keeping this matter in the public eye, telling people about the necessity of representation, because I think that's still not something that people really understand. In fact, I know it's something that people don't really understand. And what we can do to educate people about that, and then encourage good representation when it happens, because I think that's something that we need to do more of. When something good happens, we need to contact these people making these shows and say, this is why this is important to me. Thank you for doing this. I would like to see more of it. And then also, you know, really actually putting productive pressure on creatives in the industry. Because I know, you know, this whole thing of tweeting Jason Rothenberg and saying, in case you forget, fuck you. You know, I know that felt good. I know people enjoy doing that, but that's not actually productive. I'm sorry. As much as I'm sure people enjoy doing it, it's not going to help. And so, but I think there are some things that people can do that would help. And so I think maybe that's something that we could maybe focus more on in the future. And so there have been some creative things that people have done. The billboards, for example. There are folks working on some creative original content that I think is going to be fascinating to see where it goes. There have been some other things like that. And so I was wondering if maybe you guys could take 3 to 5 minutes to talk to your neighbors and see if anybody can just kind of brainstorm and generate some things that, like big or small. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be those billboards, although those were amazing. But just kind of to think about, what are some ways to think about, what we can do to kind of keep this matter of representation and all this stuff in the public eye and or even just in the eye of the people around you. So discuss. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, great, fantastic. Yeah. Oh, absolutely,
Yeah, we do. Turn this off. Did you lose it?